Hello, everyone. So for those of you who don't know Ampere Analysis, we are a mixed methodology research firm based here in London, and we specialise in the media, sports and games industries. So I'm here today to talk about some of the trends we're seeing in the digital landscape, particularly around digital content. Just making sure that works. But as Justin pointed out at the beginning of this session, there's a mixed audience in this room, so I thought it would be good to start off with some of the market sizing type information. Where is the industry at, and where do we expect it to go in future? So the video industry has largely been an unpleasant place to exist in recent years, but thankfully for all of those in the room, the digital landscape is the area that is seeing some more positivity, so bear with me for just this one slide. So what we can see here is global sector revenue across all types of video. And we can see the we can see that from 2019 all the way to 2029. You can see the impact the pandemic had on this industry, the bounce back, and then there's been quite significant steady growth over the last 3 years. But from next year onwards, we're actually due to see a bit of a slowdown in that growth at around 3% year on year. Now, if we split out the digital video space with the more traditional video space, we can see where the problem lies. So the digital space, thankfully, is seeing some modest growth, averaging around 7% year on year. And that traditional TV sector is continuing its long and steady decline, around -1%, -2% year on year. In terms of real money, what we can see here is the different business lines underlying those figures. So on the more traditional TV side, you've got pay TV, TV advertising revenue on that slow decline as people have been moving more and more online. So that decline has been mitigated by that darker blue line, and that's the subscription OTT revenue. Now, over the past 5 years, that's grown by about $84 billion. But what you can see is that line is starting to slow down. So in the next 5 years, we're only expecting $36 billion of growth. Now that's because of streaming saturation, but also consumers are wanting to cost cut too. So that means they're churning from services, but also opting for cheaper tiers. Which brings me on to the newly released ad tiers. So that red line at the bottom there is showing the video on demand, or VOD, and fast channel advertising revenue. And it's had really, really significant growth over the past 5 years. But what we can see, even though it's due to grow another 50% in the next 5 years, it's really not meeting the levels of TV advertising or pay TV revenue just yet. So we can't solely rely on this kind of new exciting area of the industry. But what we do have, finally, is the mammoth that is social video revenue. So that includes the likes of YouTube, Meta, Snap, TikTok. And really, that is just blowing everything out of proportion. Having already seen 150% growth over the past 5 years, it's due to grow further 50% by 2029. So this is partly due to advancements in targeted or addressable advertising, but also due to the increasingly huge number of people tuning in to social video. When we look at the UK, just as a local example, you can see that we had a key inflection point back in 2022, where consumers on average are now watching more subscription video than traditional TV channels. But then in that slight dark pink colour there, you can see that's the social video viewing. Now, this is self-reported, but what it shows is that UK consumers, on average, are watching more social video than the broadcaster video on demand, which is pretty remarkable when you consider how strong the BVOD presence is here in the UK. But as Justin alluded to, on the right-hand side, you've got some of those services that are contributing to that growth. So you've got really, really significant growth in engagement with YouTube and TikTok. Now, what's most interesting about this slide is in our media survey that we run, we're actually only surveying consumers from 18 years old to 64. So we're actually missing out on part of that Gen Z audience. If we look at some of our Gen Z data from one of our other surveys, what we can see is really that social media trend that we're seeing now is here to stay. So not only are the Gen Z, which is on the right-hand side of the slide, using social media more frequently, you can see that influencer videos are now the third most highly ranked media activity in that user group. Unexpectedly, I should say, broadcast TV channels are moving down that list. But what's interesting is watching games-related content. So not necessarily gaming itself, but games-related content is now sitting above the need to follow sports. And with that games-related content, many people tune into the likes of YouTube and Twitch for that too. So all of this, when we look at the revenue and the viewing habits, really highlights why more and more traditional TV players are looking to the online space for future growth. Not only does that have that ad revenue that they would like to play part of with the launch of ad tiers, but also there's a need to engage younger demographics if they're wanting to grow audiences in future. So how do they go about doing that? So I'm going to touch on a few areas of the digital content strategies. Obviously, I haven't got very much time to do so, so very much the highlights. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. I'll be kind of tuning into the different commissioning strategies that we're seeing by digital players, so maybe highlighting some partners that some of you might be able to develop your digital-first ideas with, or maybe license content too. So we've actually touched on a few of these already, which is nice. It's always good to be backed up by the people speaking before you. So the panel highlighted some of the ways they're making money. So I won't go into too much detail, but essentially we've covered advertising revenue, a very key component for most people in this room. You've got sponsored video, so brand-sponsored video, which a few of the docs panels focused on there. And then you've got that middle bar, which is content sales. Now, this has been a really, really interesting part of the industry, particularly during the pandemic and also the Hollywood strikes last year, because there were gaps in schedules that needed to be filled. So now, as again, that was covered in the panel, what we're seeing is some of that digital content that maybe, traditional TV turned their nose up at one point, there's a desire for that, especially as it's resonating with younger audiences. Then there's some kind of ancillary businesses that are kind of growing in terms of their revenue generation for the digital space. You've got linked to merchandising or maybe themed events. And then finally, you've also got subscription revenue. So not the OTT subscription, but like Yusuf mentioned, subscription revenue coming directly to him for his content. So when it comes to the kind of premium VOD landscape, what we did see is that peak TV period in the early 2022. And since then, there's kind of been a more sensible view on TV commissioning. Consumers were feeling overwhelmed with the number of services they had access to, and therefore the number of titles they could watch in any given moment. In addition to that, traditional TV players and streaming services started to cost save because they needed to focus more on return on investment. So this is just looking at global VOD commissions, and what we can see is there's still a healthy number coming out every quarter. In fact, there's about 250 TV shows and movies being commissioned every single month. Now, 75% of those are currently still being commissioned by the subscription video on-demand players. That remaining 25% has seen quite an interesting shift over the past 3 years. A few moving parts here. The significant change for me is the social media in the kind of dark blue at the top left has plummeted over the past 3 years. Now, that is due to some strategic shifts by the likes of YouTube, Snap, pulling away from original content, commissioning original content. And instead, they're leaning a lot more on their creators who are already bringing huge audiences to the platforms and sometimes on a daily basis. So for those of you involved in the influencer marketing space, there will definitely still be the kind of platforms to be looking to, and I know we're hearing from some of those later on today, so I'm sure they'll give more detail on what they're looking for. That's not to mention I am aware that YouTube still is investing in original content through its Black Voices Fund, which is looking to develop TV shows with some younger talent. You then have two other segments, so the public broadcasters. Interestingly, they are increasing their focus very much so on the online space. Now, this has primarily been driven by France and Germany, and it's because they're wanting to retain those audiences that are loyal to them as they move online too. And that started to pay off. So as German broadcaster ARD started commissioning more content to premiere on its VOD service, we actually saw the daily viewing of that service increase. So it's a very good strategy, and it will pay off in terms of keeping those audiences. The AVOD and FAST space very much heavily reliant on licensed content still, but for the likes of Roku and Tubi, who actually launched in the UK earlier this year, they have begun investing in their own original content too. So there's an opportunity there for both licensing content to those FAST channels, but also working with them to develop a new and attractive IP. So what types of content are the VOD space looking for? It was primarily very dominated by scripted content, but that has changed. We now see this equilibrium of scripted and unscripted. In the US and in Western Europe, that is more dramatic. About 60 to 65% of commissions are actually unscripted now. And that kind of echoes what we traditionally saw in the linear TV space. The similarities between streaming and TV don't stop there. So we actually are seeing an increase in the number of formats being commissioned by video on demand players. So that was traditionally very much a linear TV focus. But as VOD players are looking to cost save, they're also wanting to, assure that their shows are going to be a hit time and time again. So what better is to increase the number of formats. Now you can see some of the kind of most successful formats coming out of the VOD industry on the left-hand side. So Amazon's LOL Last One Laughing, a Japanese original format, now 60 seasons across 23 individual countries. In terms of the underlying themes, you've got romance and dating still very much the top spot. But as people are beginning to kind of feel some of that reality dating show fatigue, we're seeing a rise in the number of game show formats, like LOL Last One Laughing, but also social competitions, like All Three Media's The Traitors, originally a linear format, but it's actually been picked up by 31 individual commissioners now across linear and VOD. Here in Europe, we're seeing a very, very diverse unscripted market. So outside of formats, it's actually documentary that is taking number one spot. So that was nicely timed after the panel. In terms of topics of those documentaries, crime and thriller is still very much the focus, so those true crime docs. But we are still seeing significant commissioning and interest in sports-related documentaries, whether that's leagues, events, or individual sports personalities. In addition to that, just general kind of biopic type content too. Comedy, I haven't touched on so far. It remains quite a small share of unscripted space. When it comes to comedy, it's largely around the stand-up type programming. And that's usually to resonate and kind of humor local audiences. Now, key players in this space are the likes of Viaplay, Arte, ARD, and of course the UK broadcasters across the unscripted space. I've talked a lot about unscripted, but of course I can't ignore scripted because it is an integral part to the industry. It still makes up the majority of commissions outside of Western Europe and North America. But crime and thriller here is really the key focus. The reasons for that across Europe is that it's really appealing to a wide range of ages, genders, cultures, and it's also widely loved in terms of a genre across the region, which means not only will it have kind of high revenue generation in its first window, it can also be then licensed to second and third windows, or potentially even exported because the whole region is becoming more used to subtitling and dubbing, creating a whole new world for those crime and thriller titles. Outside of the original commissioning space, even though there's a lot of activity going on in there's a lot of people to be working with to develop maybe some of your ideas, there's also a number of other digital strategies. Now, obviously, I haven't got time to go into every single one, but a few examples I've just pulled out here. So Cobra Kai was a YouTube original. When YouTube pulled back on originals, Netflix actually took on that, and it's now on its 6th season, so one of the longest-running scripted Netflix shows. There's been a number of digital-first shows, whether short-form or long-form, being picked up by streaming services like Netflix or FAST channels, or in fact, TV networks. So HBO was quite famous for that kind of thing, so shows like High Maintenance or Insecure. But it's not only those types of shows, like scripted, typically shows, or maybe that digital short-form shows that we're seeing being picked up. A really interesting example I came across was that middle one, Canal Quickie. Based in Madrid, they launched a live news and current affairs show that was streaming on YouTube and Twitch. Then, subsequently, the show has been picked up by a local FAST channel. So we're seeing the kind of lines blur between what was traditional linear television and now this modern style of traditional television. Not only that, but now a local terrestrial TV channel has also picked up the show. So we're seeing a live TV show being showed on YouTube, Twitch, and then a delayed version of that show being shown on linear television. So I don't think any of us would have seen that coming. Finally, there's also a really big space for libraries of legacy content. So just one example of very many, but Duke Media, they have kind of created their business on packaging up short-form user-generated content and selling that on. So, shows like Ridiculousness, America's Funniest Home Videos are examples of the types of programming TV networks love to display and why there's a demand for that type of user-generated content. Finally, I thought it was important to mention that, as some of the panel also mentioned, holding on to some of that IP, so licensing some of that packaged content or working with the likes of Netflix in a windowing strategy is really important, because what that means is you then have more say about the future windows of that content. You can have it on your own platform and then generate additional revenue from partners. But then you can also go down the lines of creating maybe merchandise around that show or eventually entering into your own kind of subscription revenue too. Very whirlwind stop through the commissioning and digital content landscape. Hopefully that's given you some food for thought. Thank you very much.